All right, thank you very much for joining this conversation. This conversation today is very relevant, very interesting, and significant to be taught and taking place from the Expo Dubai. Today, we are going to speak about see us, hear us, count us in. We are going to speak about racism and anti-racism. We'll focus on Afro-descendants, with more particularly on women and girls. Our late UN Secretary General Kofi Annan once said, tolerance, intercultural dialogue, and respect of diversity is very much needed in a world where people are closely interconnected. Also, Abraham Lincoln once said, those people who do not deny freedom for others deserve freedom, but not for themselves. 1400 years ago, Umar ibn al-Khattab, the second Khalifa, once spoke to the commander on Egypt, Amr ibn al-As, and the governor of Egypt, how do you enslave people when their mothers born them free? Despite all that, the reality on the ground is not really good. And there is a lot to be done together. And today, we are going to discuss these issues. In science and anthropology, there is nothing called race except human race. The progress of the world has no color. The sufferings of the world, unfortunately, is not distributed evenly among different populations. Therefore, we have an agenda. We have a noble mission to do. Today, we are gathering physically here and online to discuss this matter, to see what is the United Nations is doing for that, and what is the action ahead of us so that we know where we are going from here. This discussion here is really important, is really timely, and very important. African descendants, particularly women and girls, are still facing structural barriers to access to education, to economic resources, to employment, and to opportunities. Therefore, we have a noble mission to do together, and we have a noble message that we brought it to the world. To start with, let me invite you to see a video. This video is it's a small documentary with 4 minutes, speaks about part of the human history of transatlantic slavery. This was prepared by UNFPA as part of its campaign to shed light on these issues and the Afro-descendant racism that needs to be addressed globally. UNFPA is doing a global initiative to raise the conversation about these issues and to see what we can do together. Let me play this video on a small city, a small port called Portobello. It's in Panama, where our executive director is coming from. And this can tell us that people will hold their culture and their identity, and they can enrich the human history and the human progress. Please, let's play this movie.
Bienvenido a Portobello y bienvenido a Portobello. Bienvenido a Portobello, ay, la gente te aclama. Bienvenido a Portobello, Portobello. bienvenida a Portobelo, ay, cómo te queremos. Bienvenido a Portobelo y bienvenido a Portobelo. Bienvenido a Portobelo, ay, la gente te aclama. Bienvenido a Portobelo, Portobelo. Bienvenido a Portobelo, ay, cómo te queremos. Bienvenido a Portobelo, bienvenido a Portobelo. Bienvenido a Portobelo. La música Congo es mi vida. Lo llevo dentro.
Si tú no tumbas la caña, me tienes que dar un beso.
Bueno, pienso que lo llevo dentro por nuestros ancestros, por toda la travesía que se dio con ellos, todo lo que ellos pasaron. Y bueno, de repente hoy estamos mucho mejor, pero estamos disfrutando lo que ellos con mucho dolor consiguieron. Porque de la manera con que fueron traídos, ¿no? Que no fue la mejor manera, fue muy triste, arrancado de su país de origen, eso es duro.
Dicen que en el 1514 fueron traídos lo que eran los africanos, los esclavizados, a trabajar en plantaciones. Venían de Angola, Camerún, de Guinea y del Congo. Muchos de esos africanos quedaron de este lado, entonces compartieron su cultura con nosotros y fue creciendo. Se dice que somos uno de los primeros pueblos que contamos con esa maravillosa tradición.
Se puede decir que Portobelo jugó un papel importante, fue como un puente, ¿verdad? Porque de aquí pasaban, venían los esclavos, los retenían aquí, de aquí salían para Perú. Y ya, bueno, siempre el ser humano, todo ser humano, en el fondo, necesita o quiere su libertad. Y entonces esa libertad costó mucho. Costó muerte, costó mucho cansancio, mucha huida, mucha rebeldía, pero al fin y al cabo se logró esa libertad que se quería tener. Pero todavía falta por hacer.
Bueno, los casos que hemos visto alrededor del mundo de racismo entristece, pues quisiéramos que vivir en un mundo donde todos nos lleváramos bien.
Varias veces me he sentido discriminada, pero ya con el tiempo he aprendido de que me gusta cómo me veo, me gusta mi color, mi pelo y todo lo demás, pero cuando es conmigo no es algo que le preste atención, pero cuando lo veo en otras personas y eso yo me pongo a pensar y la verdad es un poco desagradable tener ese sentimiento hacia una persona que es afrodescendiente, cuando en realidad casi todos somos afrodescendientes, porque si no vamos a nuestros antecedentes, a nuestros abuelos y mucho más atrás, tenemos familias que fueron afrodescendientes.
Nos une a nosotros un solo papá Dios que está allá arriba, el amor. Y todos venimos allá, de la madre patria, África. Vamos a unirnos.
¿Qué es lo que tú traes para vender?
La música es el arma más potente que sirve para erradicar el racismo a nivel mundial.
Yo pienso que la música es unión, porque fíjate que te sientes completo, una canción, estás cantando, hay más brisa, hay más luz, hay más amor, comprensión, mucha tolerancia, mucho perdón y sobre todo mucho amor.
Claro, es que la música es un lenguaje universal. La música es un lenguaje universal donde conecta todo tipo de personas. La música está en toda parte del mundo y todos nos conectamos. todos nos conectamos. Puede que no sea verbalmente, pero con los sonidos siempre va a haber una fusión donde todos quedamos conectados. Eso es por regla. Pero la música es la que puede tratar de erradicar todo este tipo de problemas racial que hay.
¿Qué es lo que tú traes para vender? ¿Qué es lo que tú traes para vender? ¿Qué es lo que tú traes para vender?
Thank you very much. It's very inspiring. Love has been repeated in this video 6 times, and Rachel 12 times. So love for this adolescent girl, our message to her, you are brilliant and beautiful as you are. With this, let me invite Dr. Natalia Kanem, the Under Secretary General and the Director and the Executive Director for UNFPA, and one of the global inspiring women and advocates for the rights, principles for a world free of racism and violence. Our keynote speaker, Dr. Natalia Kanem, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Louai Shabahne, the Arab Regional Director for UNFPA, and our able moderator today. We're very grateful to you. I'd like to extend my warmest greetings to this group of thinkers, activists, young people, and believers that racism and discrimination can come to an end based on our actions. As I welcome you to this high-level conversation on anti-racism, I repeat the refrain, see us, hear us, count us in. And it's a pleasure for me to be here in great part because of the co-presenters. With me is the United Nations Ombudsman, Shireen Dodson. We also have the privilege of having with us Lunga Kupiso, who is a young change agent, very passionate about making everyone, everywhere, feel welcomed. This is another theme that we will develop today. And through doing this, he's been able to create spaces where people can express their real selves. Again, very important, and we heard some of that theme in the video. In particular, I would like to express our thanks on behalf of the entire system to Mr. Maher Nassan, who is our outstanding Global Dubai Expo Commissioner General for the United Nations, and also our thanks to the Department of Global Communications of the United Nations. They're our host today here at the UN Hub in the Opportunity Pavilion. Ending racism is mission possible. Now, for UNFPA, the United Nations Sexual and Reproductive Health Agency, it's not only mission possible, it's also mission critical. When we think about the sexual and reproductive health and rights of women and girls around the world, and I will explain a little more about that, because while we've come a long way, and we've got to recognize that, there's still quite a path ahead. And for me, that's why today's theme couldn't be more pertinent. People of African descent, brilliant, beautiful. I recall our common ancestor, a woman who walked millions of years ago and we know her as Lucy. It's a fact, being a medical doctor, I can assure you, that our DNA is actually handed down from mother to child, whether male or female, mother to child, through eternity. So as we sit here, we really are truly sisters and brothers and everyone, because we share a common history through her. She happens to be an African woman, but in fact, of course, Africa is a descriptive that we apply after the fact. Anywhere in the world that she would have come from, it would still be a truth. But for me, it's also a way of affirming the beauty of African heritage. It's a way of assuring ourselves that we recognize the capabilities and the resilience of people of African descent who, wherever they may have landed through time, forged new ways of being and new ways of expressing a common human yearning for freedom. The United Nations Charter uses the expression larger freedom. To live one's life in larger freedom means to me expressing who you truly are. And see us, hear us, count us in is one way of saying that simply so that anyone can understand. Now, I'd like to quote James Baldwin, African-American writer, who reminded us that nothing can be changed until it is faced. And it's essential to know, as a United Nations, as a regular citizen of the world, as a young kid growing up, that we need to see using data, using facts. And we won't be able to close the gaps that the Sustainable Development Goals refer to in terms of leaving no one behind if we don't make the vulnerable visible. And ending racism is mission critical across a United Nations led by Secretary General Antonio Guterres, who has asserted his pledge for the United Nations to make good on the promise to leave no one behind and placing ending racism, discrimination, and any form of exclusion as part of what our common goal is through the 17 SDGs. And I know that we'll hear more about that from this very amazing panel that we have today. Now, in Latin America and across the Caribbean, which is home to the largest population of people of African descent, UNFPA works with health experts. We partner with so many people from across government, from civil society, from youth groups. Part of our aim is to close the data gaps so we understand who is being left behind. We can identify what we can do to act, not to just accept that that's the way that things are, but to know that things can change, hearkening back to the quote from James Baldwin. Now, last year, at the request of the government of Costa Rica, and in particular led by the president and the vice president, Madame Epsie Campbell, UNFPA and the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, it's known as ECLAC or CEPAL, released the study which showed the people of African descent in the Caribbean and Latin America in a matrix of equality versus inequality. And what we saw very clearly, perhaps it's the clearest picture that we've had anywhere in the world yet, is that the inequalities currently experienced by people of African descent in Latin America and the Caribbean is huge. It is stark, and it is a matter to address as we think of leaving no one behind. It's made us learn to be better listeners. We need to listen to people who have an issue in order to consider the solutions. And as we listen to these communities of African descent, we also learn that including them in decision-making and privileging their point of view is something that's going to help to hasten the pace of change. And this is why I hail the young people who are working on this issue, very open-minded, very clever, and coming from all walks of life, as we saw in particular after the demise of Mr. George Floyd. Now, having a good intention is important. That's a great start. But now we have to move to creating impact. And that's why I'm really pleased to have the conversation with you today, because we need to transform the way we look at this. And part of that transformation is also gendered. When we talk about the multiple discriminations that people face, race is one of them. Being Afrodescendiente, being indigenous, is something that you have to contend with. But across gender, across disability, and so many other factors, we need to look at the multiple ways that people experience, see us, hear us, and count us in. Countries across the globe, as they commit to leaving no one behind, need also to put financial resources behind the rhetoric, and that means investing. Investing in women's movements and investing in the movement for full racial equality. For UNFPA, we're over 50 years old now. Since 1994, our Cairo mandate told us that we have to stand up for the rights and choices of women and girls and anyone who is likely to be excluded. As we address data gaps, we're also working to drive social change by building communities of practice. And we're doing this to try to ensure a more equitable, diverse, and inclusive health system in particular, but the health system, again, doesn't exist in isolation. So education for an adolescent girl and investing in her economic well-being is also part of our preoccupation. Last year, UNFPA took part in the midterm review of the International Decade for People of African Descent, and that is a framework that I hope we will learn more about as the panel ensues. Just last August, the General Assembly of the United Nations passed a unanimous resolution to establish a permanent forum for people of African descent. And I think as we celebrated the first day for the first International Day for People of African Descent in Costa Rica, there was a lot of joy, but there was also a lot of pain. It was a pain of realization that for 500 years after the sailing of Columbus, after the establishment of the concept of race, there still is a huge measure of disparity that comes from historical injustice. But I stand before you today hopeful. Throughout the course of my own career and history, and my involvement with the United Nations as a young person at the first Women's Conference, happy belated Women's Day to you all, and also my participation in Durban in the year 2001, where I saw with my own eyes the power of voice, of inclusion, and placing a demand for change. Frederick Douglass famously said, "Power concedes nothing without a demand." And it is up to us to craft that demand in a way so we're not talking about another 200, 300 years. The impatience of young people is on our side, and I invite you to join with them and to listen to them as well as we work through this challenge together. I have committed to investing in the leadership of Black women because their lens and their appreciation of the dynamic of gender and race is going to be very important as we try to solve the human dilemmas which spread across all 17 SDGs. And as we march towards 2030, I want to assure you that UNFPA will be there in the fight against discriminatory law and policy, that we will continue to place data and evidence behind bringing wisdom to our ability to create change more rapidly than we've been able to do, to increase access, and in particular to bring full respect and dignity to every woman and girl of African descent around the world, to see an end to deaths in childbirth, which are preponderantly more prevalent in the Afrodescendiente community. The same is true of indigenous women. Similarly, violence against women and girls, which affects 1 in 3 in general, is a higher proportion when we add race and ethnicity into the equation. Similarly for underemployment and unemployment. When we want full equality, we want full equality for everyone. And COVID-19 was a wake-up call in that regard. It's true that conversations about race and racism can be uncomfortable and can also create a degree of worry, in particular because it can be a sensation of volatility. At the UN Dubai Expo, what we're saying is that dialogue makes a difference. I've always found that to be true, and I hope that you'll find that to be true today. So again, I want to thank our panelists, and Luai, hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Natalia, for this inspiring words, thoughts. I think she has put the tone for us and identified exactly the what part, which we all agree on. Now, how to respond to this what? This is our next paragraph with our very distinguished panelists. Natalia has already introduced them. Please welcome with me Shireen Dodson, our United Nations Ombudsman. I would love to say Ombudswoman, but this is the official name. Thank you, Shireen, for joining us, and we're looking forward to your thoughts and ideas, and to tell us more about what the United Nations is doing to push this agenda ahead. What I would like to call the star of the United Nations in Expo, Maher, please join us. Thank you very much for joining us. And the guy who called himself, I was born to change the world. Please join us longer. Thank you very much for joining us in this dynamic discussion, which would like it to have it lively, about how we can respond to this what. This agenda is noble and needs a lot of efforts, and now we would like to know how we are going to respond to these challenges that we're having. It's a historic challenge. It's a legacy that we got and has to stop. And let me start from Ms. Shireen. Ms. Shireen, the United Nations just launched the report of the Secretary General Task Force on addressing racism and promoting dignity for all. What medium-term impact do you foresee this will have on your specific work as an ombudsman or ombudswoman, which I would like to call it? And how do you see the next step ahead?
Okay, I will start with addressing ombudsman. It's a Swedish term, and the Swedes say it's non-gender, and so I stick with ombudsman. I will digress just a minute because I know most of you in this room do not know what an ombudsman is. And as an organizational ombuds, I facilitate the informal resolution of workplace conflict. And in doing that, we also bring systemic concerns to management and leadership. The third component of what we do is to convene conversations and dialogue to empower and inform and build capacity around conflict resolution. And in that capacity, I was asked to participate in the Task Force on Anti-Racism, and we convened dialogues on race. We convened dialogues in about 25 different countries, in different languages, including Arabic. And out of those dialogues, we harvested the information that we gleaned from the staff. We listened to them. Mm-hmm. And that information was passed up to the task force to inform the strategic action plan. The dialogues proved so successful that they are included in the implementation going forward. So in the medium, short, and long term, we have started the conversation and tried to help people have the difficult conversation. And we will continue to do that for the foreseeable future. Because it is just what you're saying, hear me, see me. And that's what the dialogues did. We developed a format which is, we can duplicate that. We are training people in other agencies within the UN and other offices to facilitate those dialogues themselves. And what I'm personally, I have a mandate to get the leadership to participate in the dialogues, because that is the one criticism sometimes the staff will say, well, my leader's not here, my manager's not here. And so that is my personal, to get the leaders to participate, and I'll stop there.
Shireen, you've been the ombudsman.
Yes.
I agree now. This is what we
Okay.
You've been the ombudsman since 2018, right? How do you see the internal culture in the UN system is changing vis-a-vis racism?
I think it is changing because it is being acknowledged. This is the first time the UN has looked inwardly at itself. We are so busy giving our all to everyone else, stay and deliver. And now it's about some self-care a little bit so that we can continue to deliver our mandate effectively as we want to. And so I think taking this pause, looking inward, is really beneficial to the organization, because you can't change what you don't recognize. You can't change what you can't articulate. And so now we are articulating some issues, and women in particular are speaking up and speaking out.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Our star, Maher. In the context of the United Nations system, what do you see the role of the Department of Global Communication in fighting racism? We know that you have done outstanding job in the Expo. But can you zoom on racism as an important topic and tell us how your department's work is relevant to that, and if there are things that happened, please enlighten us.
Well, thank you first of all. Welcome to all of you to the UN Hub, and really delighted to see you join us. And on this very important topic, people think of it as something that is remote, that doesn't affect them. They look at me and they see a white man and saying, he has white privilege. I am not white, first of all. People see me, assume that I am. The minute I produce my passport, barriers become. I'm Palestinian. So when humanity walked out of Africa, they walked through Palestine. So Lucy, by the way, a replica of Lucy is here at Expo in the Kenyan pavilion. So if you want to go and see Lucy, she is there. I think when we talk about the United Nations and department, I don't look at the efforts of the department, because we can't do anything alone. We have to do it with partnership with the UN system, with whether it's UNFPA, UNESCO, every part of the UN that has a communication component. We need to work together on the issues that speak to the values of the Charter of the United Nations, speak to the value of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So going from the Durban Declaration that Dr. Natalia mentioned, and the adoption of the Durban Declaration, we started to see how that can be incorporated in the work that we do. And subsequently, the UN is not perfect, nobody is. But of course, we have to follow the wish and resolutions of member states, and they take time, and they learn, and they improve on what they do. In the year 2000, we had the Millennium Declaration, which identified the 8 Millennium Development Goals. And we saw in that actually when you put targets and you work towards them, you make progress. And that gave birth to the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015. So in the Durban Declaration, there was some recognition, but it was still not felt. People of African descent still suffered marginalization, discrimination, prejudice. And it's not just slavery. Colonialism is also part of it. When you think about the African American population who are marginalized and on the bottom social economic scale, the African countries, many of which sub-Saharan African countries are among the poorest nations, it's not because they don't work hard, it's because of the legacy of colonialism. And the legacy of colonialism, the legacy of racism is what creates this, slavery is what creates racism and continuous prejudice. So all of the work that we do, we try to incorporate this from the human rights perspective. When we talk about rights, it's a right to be recognized as a person, regardless of your color, your gender, your sexual preference, your political ideology, or whichever passport you carry. But the real world is not like that. We forget, and people get carried away. Even now, as we talk about, and people think of racism in the context of what is Mr. George Floyd's death, and Ahmaud Arbery, and others. But when you read stories today about African students being turned away when they are trying to escape Ukraine to European countries, and some countries and borders being closed to people of color and open to people who are white. That is still happening today. So these are the kinds of things that we have to be, like you said, once we recognize them, talk about them, put them in the front and center of the conversation, we are able to start dealing with them and moving to a solution. So the success of the Durban Declaration in bringing and putting this on the agenda of the United Nations was followed by the creation of the International Year of People of African Descent in 2011. And then within that year, it was recognized this problem is more than a year. So in 2013, again, the General Assembly created the Decade of Action to bring about with a program of how actually can you tackle this. And to specifically on the issue of slavery, in 2007, the General Assembly adopted a resolution announcing the 25th of March, which we will mark this year, as the International Day of Remembrance of the Victims of Slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade, Resolution 62/122, which created a program remembering slavery that we manage in the department. And every year, for the first few years, we were organizing and focusing on the day, the 25th of March. But for 5 years back and until now, we try to spread it out throughout the year. We have exhibits, we have education, film screenings, we have discussions, and we have, of course, the event itself. So this year, we launched already, there's an exhibit in the United Nations lobby, General Assembly lobby, on racism. This year's theme is resistance through the courage of resistance, uniting against racism and countering slavery, racism. So all of that is what we are building on, of the collective effort and work of what the UN system does, but also bringing it to member states. We have to do it with member states, because also they are the ones who gave us the mandate, and they are the ones within their borders, the problems exist.
We can maneuver. Thank you very much, Maher, for these insights. Let me move to the language of economics. We have done with the supply side what we think we are doing. And since young people are the agents of change, and all of us recognize this, they demand their voices to be heard all the time. Longa, to what extent you feel that young people are empowered to be agents of change to combat racism?
Firstly, hello to everybody here. I think it's so important that we've taken the time to be a part and parcel of the conversation. That in itself is a testament of our desire to see change happening around us, part and parcel of that change. I think if you look in particular at the subject of seeing us, hearing us, and then counting us in, you try and reflect on the history of human relations over the last 10 years and maybe 15 years, you'll see that perhaps as a black man or as a son of a black community, we've been screaming at the top of our lungs, trying to be recognized. And perhaps we didn't really realize that we were not being seen. And so you come to 2021 or 2020, 2021, and 2022, where we have Black Lives Matter, and you begin to realize the importance of acknowledging seeing someone. Before you yourself to a point where you understand what it means or what a black person or a person of color is saying when they say Black Lives Matter. You have to see them as you see yourself, right? Then when you hear them, you understand what it is that they're trying to communicate with you based on what you hear from them, having seen them. Then you can acknowledge. And that acknowledgement is counting them in, counting them as a part of who you are, and marrying your story to their story. And I think as a young person speaking in this panel on behalf of young people, we can safely say we've been afforded the opportunities, not at a grand scale, but we've been afforded opportunities, unlike the past, to be part and parcel of the conversations, and that's important. But if we're looking in particular young people-led organizations or initiatives, I think we need to empower their ideas. And by empowering their ideas, we're not just talking about monetary empowerment. We're talking about empowerment that is going to ensure that the ideas they have are long-lasting, are ideas that are going to really effect change, not just over a 12-month period or a financial calendar, but we're looking at 3 to 5 year period, 5 to 10 years. And what that then requires of the person who is empowering these ideas is to open networks to individuals who have a certain skill or a particular experience in a particular field that I myself, as a young person who's leading an idea or an initiative, can learn from. What that allows me is the opportunity to create a sustainable environment for what I'm trying to do for my community, for what I'm trying to do for the communities that can then benefit from that. I think that's what real empowerment looks like now. In the past, empowerment may have looked like opening doors, allowing us to be a part and parcel of the conversations. But now it's time for that idea of empowerment to really take shape in that light. If you look at the strategical planning of CSI, looking at corporates, CSI is mostly focused on numbers, because at the end of the year when you have to report, you have to say how many people you've reached, how many lives you've touched. But I think that in itself is corporates refusing to see the people that they're trying to hear. It is refusing to acknowledge the people that they're trying to actively help in changing their lives. So if we were to try and shift the CSI model into one that is focused on how many people are we influencing, how much influence are we creating, using young people as a vessel to drive that influence. And then finally, when you are sitting at the policy table, do not discount young people flagging inexperience as part of the reason for not allowing them to be a part of those conversations. In my language, in isiXhosa, because I'm kitted out in isiXhosa for those of you who are wondering, which is in South Africa. In my language, we have a saying that says, if you want to bend or change the shape of a tree, you do it whilst it's still small, whilst it's still wet. And you will be able to manipulate and maneuver the shape of that tree. But once it has grown, there's nothing you can do. So then that is my call then to the policy table to say, if you want us to carry the policies, we have to be part and parcel of them from an early age.
Longer they say, in a racist society, it is not enough to be non-racist. You have to be anti-racism. To what extent, or what do you feel that young people need to be changers and pioneers, champions for anti-racism?
Well, firstly, I would also say we are all activists. We are all pioneers of an environment, of a society that is free from racism. And if you sit here today or you get the opportunity to hear us speak at this panel and you say, well, I'm not an activist, and I live in a society where all my friends are welcome and they know that they're welcome, then I say to you, you are the person whom, as activists, we endeavor to change your heart or to change the way you view the world. you are part and parcel of the system that continues to to encourage an environment that discriminates. You know, my call or my rally would be that we see ourselves not as young and old, but we see ourselves as agents who have the opportunity to reach out to different levels or to different zones. If you look at the ripple effect, it has the immediate, then it has the secondary, it has the tertiary, and so forth and so forth. We have to look at ourselves as individual key players in each layer. So young people, it's my immediate circle. Those are the people that I can impact. Those are the people I can reach out to. Perhaps for yourself, you're looking at the secondary, at the tertiary, and so on, because you've had an opportunity to build your network. And creating then that link, creating that connection between the different layers, so that as I advance in age, I also advance in my ability to influence those circles. And I think that is, you know, that's a proactive approach that would help us as young people to see change, but also encourage us to continue being active change makers.
Thank you very much for this insight. This is always inspiring to listen to young people. Always. Shireen, let me come back to you. And allow me to ask you about your personal life.
Oh, okay.
I would like to hear and you to share with us your personal story. You are an American of Afro descent, and you have gone the whole way until you became senior in the US Department, but again now in the UN. From this story of your life, what you see is holding us back to achieve an equal world that is free of violence and racism, and please focus on the fact that you are Afro-descendant, but also a female.
That's a tall order. Grew up in a small town in New Jersey in the United States. My grandmother was a registered nurse and my grandfather was a domestic. And so my mother and my uncles were the first to go to college in there. So I knew one thing growing up. I was going to college. Education was critical. And I had choices. I was almost going to an all-girls school, Wesleyan, which was predominantly white. And at the last second, I went to Morgan State, an historically black college. And interestingly enough, it was the first place that I really felt at home and also felt racism. Because I was light, I had long hair, which was almost blondish then, and I wasn't black enough. So that was an interesting part of my journey, trying to prove my blackness, and at one point I fro out to here.
Okay.
But I was blessed, and then, graduated from college, went to law school, and my first job, I had a mentor, an older white man. Well, actually, my second job, where I became a manager, but he told me two things that have really helped me through my career. One, he said, Shireen, it's a game. Learn the rules. You can substitute rules for culture and play it better. The second thing was, don't ever take anything personal. You're not that important. It's not about you. It's about them and what they're feeling. And every job I've had one foot firmly planted in what I knew and the other foot in something totally different. So a very eclectic career. But I would always go in and learn the structure, where the power is, what the culture is, because otherwise you can't function. And that has been true. The UN is the most unique organization in the planet. But you have to understand there's a way to get stuff done, and there's a way that you're just going to hit a brick wall.
Mhm.
Taking stuff personal, if you do that, you can't think. You're emotional. You can't be strategic. And to be successful, you have to be strategic. And for women, I say that we tend to want to take it personal. We want to feel our feelings. And you, in a job and in work, you have to just keep your eye on the goal. When you get in the room, you bring others in the room. When you get in the room, you sit at the table, you don't sit on the sidelines. You know, we have to help them see us and help them hear us, because we have to speak up. So throughout my career, I have been speaking up. I've been learning how to play the game. But the secret in all of it, you have to be true to you, true to your values. You cannot ever let anyone change your values. And I have a saying, you know, there's nothing that I have done or said that I wouldn't see in print on the front page of the New York Times above the fold. You know, Mr. Communications man.
Thank you very much. Very, very much thank you for sharing this. Hi, Maher, I would like to come back to you as the champion of partnership. How do you see that partnership can help us to amplify this agenda to support anti-racism with focus on women and girls, the Afro-descendants?
I think partnerships are definitely important, but it also starts first always with the principles. Once the principles are set, and then you can build the partnerships around. One of the things that I always hold front and center in my thinking is a quote from Secretary General Boutros Ghali when he addressed the Security Council the first time in the early 90s. In these turbulent times, there's only one power that can impose order on incipient chaos. It is the power of principles transcending changing perceptions of expediency. Now, when we hold that as a principle, whether it's about issues of matter of war and peace or issues of racism, first we have to define the principles. And the principles are defined in this topic that we're talking about in the Charter of the United Nations. They are also defined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So when we go out to seek partnerships, we also know as communicators, the UN reports, statistics, tables, they don't change people's minds. People, they read them, they move on, or most likely they don't read them. Stories are how you get to people. So we have been partnering with creators. One of the core principles of our program, the Remembering Slavery, is to actually partner with filmmakers and creators of art that then we can use those stories, whether it's a television series or it's a film that we screen at the United Nations, and then we bring in the experts and then tie in that story with the principles that we are trying to promote. So stories and storytelling and connecting to the person.
Communication.
The more, there's actually, it's been used, some journalists have used that quotation, the more people die, the less we care. And you'll notice this, the first week after a conflict, people will know the name of the first victim and they will care about it, and then as the war drags on, whether that war is in Ukraine, Afghanistan, Central African Republic, Yemen, or whichever it is, it becomes, the news goes down, down, down from the front page to the second page to the last page. But at the core of it, it's an issue of power. I mean, both, we heard, it's an issue of power and power dynamics. You talk about the legacy of racism and why those communities are the most affected, because they were impoverished by slavery and the prejudice kept them down in those compartmentalized ghettos in some countries and some places. So we have to also address it as an issue of power. The same thing with gender. And gender is about power imbalance. And the Secretary General speaks about it openly. He says Power is not shared. It's not given. You have to ask for it.
Okay.
One photo that was tweeted and shared widely last month was of the Munich summit, the Munich, what's it called, security summit. They had a lunch, CEO lunch photo that was shared. It was all men, white men. So people commented, why are there no women? Well, why aren't there also people of color?
Yes.
That was also another question that we needed to have asked.
Thank you very much, Maher. We are running out of time. In 30 seconds, only 30 seconds, can you, Longa, tell me and the audience, what can young people do to contribute to this agenda?
I think we are already contributing. We must continue to champion the interests of those who are disenfranchised. We must continue to fight the good fight. My biggest fear is that we're running out of energy because we feel the doors we are knocking at and the people we are speaking to are not necessarily hearing us and listening to us with a vested interest. And so my appeal would be we need to continue, just like our grandparents, their grandparents, and our forefathers champion the cause of democracy and the cause of freedom. We have to believe that someday, it might not be in our lifetime, but at some point in life, we, and by we I mean descendants of our race, descendants of the African continent, in my particular context, will enjoy a world that is free of racism, that is free of gender bias for my African sisters, a world where we live and dream as though we are one. We have to continue challenging policymakers. It's not good enough to say we've written to them. We have to continue challenging. And if that means it comes at the sacrifice of one's freedom, so be it. Because the number of people who benefit from that, when one person is bold enough to challenge authority, it's insurmountable. And I think my 30 seconds.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Indeed, I really appreciate that. So we have listened to a number of quotes and very powerful clauses. Communication is very important. Be you as you are. You are beautiful, brilliant as you are. Speak up. Don't shy. Don't take it personal. Don't be sensitive. Believe in the cause. Believe in the mission. All these issues need to take it as our key messages as we go. Our panelists, I thank you very much for your insights. Thank you so much. I really appreciate the discussion. You have enriched our discussion and you have brought to the table a comprehensive views from different angles on how we can proceed as we go. Natalia, may I invite you for a closing remarks, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, look, I want to appreciate this pretty amazing panel again and ask you to stay. And Lou, I would like to relinquish a little bit of my time so that maybe one or two people who are part of the dialogue in the audience can give a reflection or a short question or comment, and then you can bring me back thereafter. Okay?
Okay. Thank you very much. Let me go back to the audience for further contributions, different dimensions that you would like to add to the discussions that has been already shared with you from the supply side, from young people contributions. Who would like to contribute? Yeah, here's the mic. Yes, thank you very much. Please, introduce yourself and as she said, speak up.
Alrighty, no pressure. Hi, everyone. First of all, thank you so much because these are really important conversations to have. And having grown up on this side of the world. I'm from Sudan, but I'm born and raised in the UAE. My family grew up here, been here since the 70s. Now, the perspective on race changes a little bit when you get to see it from here and being exposed to Western culture and having a lot of Western influence. Because our experience with race isn't so much systemic in the sense that I've never felt unsafe or like I can't call 999 and feel protected, but I see it every time I'm on Twitter, every time I am exposed to other people of color from other parts of the world. And it's really hard to transcend that message to people that not everyone has to, Google how safe it is for Black people in the country before they travel there, or what it's like to be a person of color in a specific environment. And sometimes it gets tiring, to just kind of be in that front line. So thank you for having this conversation, and thank you for drawing light to that, even in the sense of me not wanting to pick up this mic and speak right now. But there's so much being done, and there's so much to do. And excuse me to just take one more minute to say, I feel like history plays a big part in it and how we tell our story about history. Because unfortunately, while Sudan had a lot of people be pulled out for the slave trade, it also had a lot of slave traders. And that was the reality across Africa. It wasn't so much Black people being pulled out of, their villages into this. This was a transaction, people traded in other people. Some of those people were also African. And we need to start telling the story differently, I think, because that's not something I learned until I was a junior in college in an African history class. So thank you for having these conversations. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Another contribution. Yes, please. Shireen.
I think you're right on point, and that's something that I try to emphasize, especially being at the UN. Racism manifests itself differently depending on the country and where you are. And I try to encourage, after the George Floyd murder, everybody wanted to talk to me. And I would say, no, go read. Here's some books I suggest. After you read these books, then come back and talk to me. Because I don't think it's my job to educate you, but you have to have some fundamental understanding. So I would offer that to you for people who want to wear you out all the time. Say, go read this, and then we'll talk.
Just to add on this, I think this is why our program is called Remembering the Victims of the Transatlantic Slave Trade and Slavery. Because before the transatlantic slave trade existed, there was slavery. And many of the ports in West Africa were already trading in slaves for the Middle East. And that they were already established, not for the transatlantic slave trade. So the 1619 project that the New York Times launched, and we are really happy that on the 29th of March, the event on the General Assembly for the Remember Slavery program, the keynote speaker is going to be the author and the creator of the 1619 project, Nicole Hannah-Jones. So we were going to have her last year. We managed to get her, and we're looking forward to that. But racism isn't born with us. I mean, social sciences tell us, and experiments with babies. Babies are not racist. They are taught racism. And racism isn't only against Africans. I mean, we saw that after COVID, in America and some countries, there was racism against people of Chinese origin or who looked Chinese. I mean, there was also the case of the woman who just recently was pushed on the tracks in New York City because she was Asian. And so and we have racism in some African countries against people of another African country. So we have to really be honest, and I think the conversation needs, like I said, the principles, once we have the principles clear, honesty, and addressing it at the core.
Thank you very much. Can you give this mic here?
Hello, my name is Eva. I wanted to thank you very much for providing us with important insight around the topic of racism. And I had a question, actually, not a comment, for Mrs. Dodson. You mentioned that part of your role in the UN was to address structural issues around racism and discrimination. And I was just wondering, whether you could shed light on what some of the issues identified are and what is being done to address those issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Shireen.
A lot of the structural issues are around the HR system, you know, how we recruit, how we promote and things like that. So as a result of some of the issues that have been identified, they are doing a full review of all of the system, but more importantly, the components that make up the system, to see where they can change and where the change is within the Secretary General's authority and does not have to go to the General Assembly. So I think that is the biggest area where we saw systemic issues, because, yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah, please.
Hi, Harry Goodall with SOS Children's Villages. I work here in Dubai in the Gulf, so I just wanted to say thank you to all of you. Wonderful work and much appreciated. We wish you all the best. I wish we had more time to talk because there's much to discuss. I want to just second something that Alunga said. I'm originally from the Congo. I know I don't look like it, but I was born and raised in the Congo. And we have a saying there. So you said, we're all activists, or we need to be activists. So I just wanted to say, amen. That is so true, because my decision on how I treat my neighbor or someone I meet in the street, that is a reflection on me. That's something I can decide on. Secondly, you were saying it's not personal. Everything is really personal at the end of the day, but I like the way your mentor tried to shield you from that, because I know you took a lot of things personally, there's no question. But we have a proverb where I come from. I'm a member of the Mongo tribe, and it's the greatest compliment you can give someone, like all of you are younger than me, so you would ask me, Lo sakumpaka, which means what is your proverb? And I would look at you and I would make a determination based on what you need that day. But the biggest compliment you can give to anyone is say, unkuena, which means I see you. I see you. So I think if we go about our day and our lives really seeing each other, we will all be activists. Thank you.
Yes, yes.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your contribution. Thank you so much. Please, Longa.
Firstly, your feedback it gets to me because it makes me somewhat emotional, because back in the day, my great-grandmother, so I had the pleasure of being raised by my great-grandmother, and they're great storytellers. And the one poignant lesson that she left me with was education, as great as it was to allow her children to find work or to better their lives, it also became the single biggest threat to some of the lessons that they had learned from their forefathers. And if you look at who we are as a people, as an African people in this case, we actually have a lot of lifelong lessons that are part and parcel of our culture that actually can create an environment that is free of all the injustices that we're trying to eradicate in today's world. And if we were just to recognize the people for who they are and take into account what it is that they bring to the table, as different and as weird as it may look in our world today, I think the world would be in such a better place. So you've inspired me to continue the quest of learning more about who we are, because I think in that, when we learn about our history and the beautiful lessons that are embedded in how we treated one another as a black people, we can make the world a better place. Instantly we relate. As different as we may look, we relate.
Thank you very much. I have just one question. 1 minute, yalla. Go ahead, yes. Go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, good afternoon. I'm Marikar from Gulf today. I want to raise this question. Probably it's sensitive, but I want to raise it anyway. Because Mr. Nasser mentioned about racism being not only among and against people of African descent or Africans, but it cuts across all nationalities. And okay, since we are in the United Nations and ILO is part of the United Nations, now what can you say about, because there's this big issue, sensitive issue about, people getting much higher wages, more privileges, more benefits because of their passports. Like, for example, I'm from the Philippines, and, even if I have, for example, I'm more qualified to get another job or get a higher salary, but I'm a Filipino and I have that Philippine passports compared. Sorry if I would, for example, he's British and he's a man. So what is your take on that? It's a very sensitive issue, and it's been occurring all over the world.
Thank you very much. I think Natalia in her speech said nothing will be changed unless it is faced. Let me with this ask Natalia for her closing remarks. And yeah.
Let me just address your question, because I think the issue about nationality and equality is also central to ending all forms of discrimination. Today we're talking about racism, but as I indicated, there's a nexus of so many other qualities. What I appreciate about Secretary General's leadership right now is that he has named the question of differential staff issues as one of the things that we have to look at. And Shireen is actually one of the leaders in that. So I think we should get your perspective and understand better what more can be done. The ladder to success should in no way be determined by your nationality. That's my belief, full stop. I also think that there are ways that we can prepare people so that the open competition, and in a way the value judgment of which kind of degree from what institution, can also be dispensed with. So when we look at geographic location, we see ability rather than trying to stereotype in a sense. So thank you very much for putting this on the table. I would also like to once again thank the panel, because we've looked at race today as one element of discrimination, and that's very important. But when we think about sexual diversity, when we address the component of disability versus ability, or should I say differential ability. And there's so many other parameters, although of course gender, race may predominate. We have to look at people in our totality, and we have to look at the 17 SDGs in their totality as well. Now, the issue of discriminating against people based on experience is another tough one, I think, for not just United Nations, but any employer. If we reject someone because they don't have experience, and then they don't have experience, and then they will never get experience, how do we build the kind of ladders that you're describing? So I think there are things that we can engage with productively. I would like to answer my brother here by saying that my proverb for today is this one: depend upon one to count to two. To me, that means that in my fight against discrimination, in my ideal world where every 10-year-old girl grows up knowing that she's precious, that she'll be protected, that we will support her, I will have allies. I will be able to depend upon you, to whatever your realm is, to be in that inner circle of the ripple effect, and to use your voice so that you are seen and heard as somebody who will interrupt discrimination, who will have the courage to assist the person who asks, and who will also invite the type of dialogue which has to come from a place of humility. No one knows everything. No one can do anything on their own. So I think, again, as the panel has shown us, there is a great deal of power in partnership. There's a great deal of power in understanding the data and the evidence, but then also the courage, the willingness to act. So I'd like to join you in appreciating once again all of us, because you chose to be here today. I think many of you chose to participate, and probably if we'd gone around the room, we would all have gained insights. In particular, the commentators from the audience, I really want to thank you for giving us your very, very valuable perspectives. We appreciate that too.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Natalia, for these remarks. At the end of this discussion and conversation, I would like to thank you all very much for being here. Peter Gabriel Biko once said, "You can blow out a candle, but you cannot blow out fire. Once the flames begin, the wind will make it happen." And today, we have blown up a small candle. And I hope that it will go and the discussion and conversation continue about this topic and similar topics to reach a world free of discrimination, of racism, of gender-based violence, and any sort of violence based on color or gender or preference. Let me end by another video that has been done by Peter Gabriel, who was inspired by the death of the anti-apartheid activist Steve Biko. Let's watch that as we close. Thank you very much.
September 77, Port Elizabeth weather fine. It was business as usual in police room 619. Oh, be cool, because be cool. Oh, because the man is dead, the man is dead.
watching